Hello there. I hope that you're doing well. We're moving right along in the term and getting into week number 4. So let's dive straight into it. So our focus for this week is going to be about communicating health and science online. This is an online class. We have the ability to communicate using technology and media, and we've had the chance to talk a little bit about how health and science issues impact us, including online communication, telehealth, and so forth. But we'll be getting into this rapidly changing landscape of healthcare and health communication that impacts so many of our career fields, goals, and our interactions. So let's get into it. Before we get started, I do want to remind you of an upcoming assignment. First of all, thank you for turning in your annotated bibliographies. I look forward to reviewing those. You should expect to receive grades and feedback on those by the end of this week. So the next major assignment that you have coming up is due on May 14th. So you've got about 3 weeks to plan ahead and think about what you'd like to do for this assignment. What I'm asking you to do is to think about a health or science topic that can disproportionately impact a particular culture, demographic, or group. What I'm asking you to do is to develop a 3 to 4 page double-spaced, standard font margins, Times New Roman response in which you describe how communication about health and science has impacted this population and strategies that might be used in order to better serve this population, while integrating at least 2 outside sources. Now, if the topic that you chose for your annotated bibliography and its associated sources are interesting and relevant to this, you're definitely welcome to explore and expand on that topic for this essay. You're also welcome to pick a totally different topic if you'd prefer to do that. One example, for instance, is you might give an essay in which you talk about the HIV/AIDS epidemic and its impact on members of the LGBTQ+ community. That's a population disproportionately impacted by a health issue, and you could look at examples of successful health campaigns and efforts that are designed to raise awareness and support people impacted by this demographic. So that'd be an example of the types of things that you could focus on. I've also had focus on elderly patients and telehealth. I've had articles and essays that have focused on issues impacting disabled veterans. So there's a variety of different topics you can choose, and I encourage you to reach out to me if you're thinking about ideas and you're trying to brainstorm what this might look like. I'm also happy, as always, to look over a rough draft or outline in advance. So for today, we'll be going over the role of e-health, m-health, and telemedicine. We'll be talking about some of the challenges in health information and accessing health information. We'll talk about some of the important issues related to misinformation and disinformation as it impacts our understanding of health and science communication too. So to get started, I think it's important for us to set the scene for the significance of online care. And I wanted to share a study that was recently published in collaboration with a variety of health outlets, including Mercer and the American Benefits Council, as well as Catalyst, which have identified, the major shift that we've seen in recent years. With COVID-19, we noticed a drastic shift online to people who are seeking care and seeking support from doctors using telehealth, communicating through portals similar to Zoom. We've also seen a lot of forms of mental health, including counseling, that's been moved over. And while in our current era, we do see a return to a lot of face-to-face appointments, we do see the role of online communication and telehealth as being very prevalent. So I think it's important for us to think about the role that virtual care has. For example, since April of 2020, there has been over an 8,000% increase in the usage of telemedicine, communicating online. There's also a whole lot of funding that has gone into virtual visits, including the role of federal funds to create virtual care facilities and the use of communication platforms and investment in things such as AI. Course, with things such as ChatGPT the increasing role that AI is playing in our lives, we're continuing to see a lot of shifts in terms of how online care is being managed and used. So I think this helps us set the scene for the significance and way in which online communication is facilitating and adding challenge to how we do health and science communication. So to define a few key terms, I think it's important for us to start with e-health, right? And generally speaking, that's referring to using electronic means, using a device such as a laptop, tablet, or phone to communicate and transmit resources, and health information. For example, perhaps the National Institutes of Health includes something like a brochure or pamphlet through which they're sharing relevant information. mHealth is how devices are used to promote good health. For instance, it might be something such as a fitness tracker, or you're using an iPhone and it has the app that tracks the number of steps that you take each day. Telemedicine is about how we use technology to close gaps in health information. So for instance, telemedicine might involve speaking out and messaging or reaching out to people who are in need of additional medical support, such as setting up a doctor's appointment or getting them configured into a portal. Web 2.0, right, has involved the role of using new media and technology, and we're now entering an era of Web 3.0, where there's shifts, as mentioned, in things such as AI, online generation of material, and even further shifts online. So we're seeing the shifting role of the internet and the role that that's played as impacting the way that we communicate. It's also important for us to think about what are known as different spheres. This references communication scholar Thomas Goodnight's work in defining and explicating how some of these spheres play out in communication. We have what's known as the personal or private sphere that refers to close family members or an internal dialogue that you have with yourself. We have a technical sphere, which refers generally to very strict rules and membership. We can think about this such as a team of health professionals or medical center in which support is provided. And then public health refers to a larger environment, communication that's reaching a broad audience using things such as Twitter, press releases, television, and other forms of media to engage with a wide audience. We'll talk more next week about how health communication is reaching the public. So there's a variety of different theories that are discussed in Chapter 9 of Capre, which get into some of the different ways in which health communication and technology engage. One of them is the idea of social network theory. So social network theory is making the argument that our engagement with social media and our connections on that basis are the way in which we form meaningful relationships with other people. Think about it like putting the pieces together. And we form strong and weak ties with others that are impacting our use of media. For example, maybe you have a friend or a close family member who you regularly engage with using media, which forms a strong tie within your social network. This is important because when we seek out health information online, we're oftentimes getting that information from friends, family members, people close to us. For instance, maybe we have a friend who recently got Botox, right? And they're talking about that experience. And we're weighing out the health impacts of that decision and its cosmetic impacts on our lives in terms of doing that for ourselves. It's also important for us to think about how we are gaining and using information that we're accessing through online channels. There's what's known as the information sufficiency threshold, which is the amount of information we need in order to feel understanding about information and understanding an issue. We felt this a lot with COVID-19. How much information about COVID, its effects, its symptoms do we need to know before we feel like we've got a full grasp and can feel confident in our decisions going forward? So this helps us to understand information. For instance, perhaps you go to the doctor and they diagnose you with ADHD. You are shocked and you try to find information online about ADHD to try to learn more about and become more comfortable with that experience. If you think back to the way in which we discussed last week, the transformation of identity and the different identity stages we work through, health information online is a way that we're able to develop a sense of identity that might be changing based on medical diagnosis and additional information. There's also what's known as the theory of motivated information management, which suggests that we're deliberately seeking out health information that could be beneficial to us. For instance, if we have ADHD, we might be seeking out medications and forms of support that could be useful on that basis. And then lastly, there's what's known as the integrative model of online health information seeking, which is a mouthful, but describes the idea that there are a variety of social structures and inequities that create differences in how we seek out and utilize health information. One of the big ones, of course, is the digital divide. Not everybody has access to high-speed internet, and not everybody has access to a device that's going to be able to download and use this type of information for us to access for help. So we have to consider how, if we're circulating health information online, it's not going to reach every population equally, and not everybody is going to get the level of access that they might need to that technology and to those resources. So eHealth and engaging online has a variety of advantages as well as drawbacks. One of the things that made eHealth incredibly popular under COVID-19 was that it was safe and accessible. You could do an online meeting and you didn't have to worry about going into a hospital and being at risk of catching COVID. eHealth can be engaging, right? It's the opportunity to have a direct correspondence and one-on-one engagement with somebody online in a way that could feel very one-to-one. It allows for practical advice and targeted messaging. That is, a health provider, for instance, a specialized provider who might normally be outside of your location or region. For instance, a rheumatologist is able to speak to you and advocate in a very specific way that you might not have resources to access locally. One challenge of eHealth is that it can provide counterproductive information, right? You can check things like WebMD and similar resources, or check Wikipedia, but that information isn't always accurate. Sometimes there are problems with information that's available online. There's often a lot to sort through online. There's a lot of articles, there's a lot of discussion. You might get onto various servers or Reddit in order to try to understand what's going on. There's also issues with privacy, right? How is my information being managed and used online in that setting, knowing the risk of hacking and compromising secured material, and access to online resources, again, inequities and challenges and access to devices and material that can follow along unequal lines. So that can be a challenge with providing that quality of care and information. When it comes to receiving health information, right, health information seeking is how we utilize searches and the pursuing of relevant data that we need in order to make decisions about our health and well-being. It means that we're doing scanning, where we're placing information into our memory. Somebody mentions that they have started taking a new medication, and we remember this medication for later. There's also the idea of health information efficacy. It's our ability to have confidence and understanding of information. If I know, for instance, that I have a cut, what do I need to do in order to address that cut? Do I have confidence that I can deal with that effectively? If I see someone collapse, do I understand how to perform CPR? Right? So health information efficacy is that I both feel like I can do something, and I also feel like I can get the information I need if I don't know how to do something now. And not everybody feels health information efficacy if they're not sure where to start in seeking out and utilizing health information. A theory you might be familiar with if you've taken a communication course or two before is the idea of uses and gratifications theory. And this is a useful framework for understanding how we gather and use health information. Under UNG, it argues that we are seeking out mediated messages in an active, goal-oriented way. In other words, we are the ones who are asking media to serve us and to serve our needs. We're choosing what to subscribe to, what to follow, right? And media has to respond to us and to our needs. So consumer demand is the driving force here. And if we think about this theory, right, we're seeking out information about health. We're trying to understand. If we're doing a Google search, oftentimes there's auto-filled results. They're speaking to people who have had similar questions to our own on a given health issue. There, of course, as you might imagine, are a lot of challenges with how we engage online and utilize some of this material. One of them, as we'll talk a little bit more about in just a bit, is that not all the information we get online is correct or something that we understand. Or sometimes there are rare conditions that are difficult to acquire information about online. And we know that there are scammers and entrepreneurs who benefit from false information. For example, perhaps a company advertises a superfood that's not FDA approved, but they say is going to lead to significant improvements to your health. It could cure cancer, right? Which might tempt people, but in practice be a waste of time, money, and perhaps compromise security. So that can be a challenge engaging online effectively. So telehealth, engaging in that capacity, has a lot of different advantages. It has more frequent communication because you're able to engage online more. It can allow you to disclose and share information. It can be more straightforward. Somebody has a block of time to meet with you for a very specific goal. If you're in an underserved community or region that doesn't have access to experts in the field as much, you can seek out that information. Better care can also reduce expense, right? We've talked about preventative care and the idea that preventative care saves money because people don't have to pay for expensive surgery and treatments. People can be better educated about issues because they're able to engage online. And it can avoid repetition because people are able to move forward in their sessions. Of course, it's also logistically beneficial. It saves time on travel and office visits. Sometimes it can improve the quality of medicine because you're able to receive more precise care. It also allows you to transfer and utilize information easily. Perhaps a doctor is using a chart or online program where you can access test results and other information. For example, you have a visit, you're asked to go and complete a blood test, and the results of that test will show up online for you. Telehealth also has some challenges. There is a lot of cost and funding that goes into the use of the server, the use of resources online. There's also legal and privacy considerations, again, knowing that information online can be hacked and used in ways that compromise people. Sometimes information can be restrictive, especially if you have a short session. And sometimes providers, like the amount of time and capacity with which a provider is working, like if a provider is texting you, how is that compensated and supported? There's tech gaps as well as laws and malpractice that can be a problem as well. It's more difficult to be able to make a claim about medical malpractice when it's happening online. And sometimes the use of telehealth might be seen as inferior to face-to-face medicine because physically checking the body, being able to provide one-to-one care in a three-dimensional space can oftentimes be something that patients need. I want to talk a little bit next about the Infodemic article, which uses COVID-19 as a case study to talk about the role of mis- and disinformation in our understanding of health and science-related issues, which helps us more generally talk about how we can promote healthy behavior and engage with some of the challenges online. The argument that's raised from this article is that an infodemic is as damaging as a pandemic, insofar as an infodemic can lead to adverse health outcomes, it can hurt people's quality of life, and so forth. I think it's a good idea for us to understand some of the distinction between terms here, right? There's been a lot of scholarship related to these issues. We can start with misinformation, right? It's information that's false, that's incorrect, but it's not necessarily designed to harm somebody else, right? It's perhaps somebody who has shared an article and says, look, these rates of disease have gone down by 500%. And the actual article only says that it's gone down by 50%. So maybe they misread the article and they're reading a conclusion that wasn't accurate. Malinformation is information that's intended to harm, but not necessarily false. Sometimes malinformation can be providing information about a patient and their well-being in a way that is designed to hurt them, providing them with a diagnosis that might make it more difficult for them to seek out care. And then disinformation is both false and done with the intent to harm, right? So the circulation of false or fraudulent research, of studies that have problems, of articles that are not well backed up, of the use of kind of troll accounts to share information, right? It's not only incorrect, but it's designed to make things worse for people. So that's what we're talking about when we're addressing disinformation specifically. We think about media, right? Media is a double-edged sword because on the one end, media provides information with us that can improve upon our health outcomes, but media can also be harmful, right? Media can be a thing that provides dis or misinformation too. So media provides a window to the public to access health information. If you were following the news in COVID-19, the headlines and various figures talking about the rates, the health experts talking about the issue, were oftentimes a source of comfort for many people as they were trying to better understand what was going on. Media can also contribute to changing attitudes. What do we do? What are the policies or actions that we take? And media can be effective when they convey strong and clear information. Here is a set of guidelines that we should do and follow, such as a set of guidelines laid out by the CDC. It's also useful for us to think about how scientific communication should work, recognizing some of the challenges with research, right? The goal of research is to try to understand more and to create data that can be generalized and used in a broader capacity, which raises questions surrounding the role of ethics, right? One idea here is that if something is valid, that means that the study is consistent, right? That overall, this study is able to reach correct conclusions. It's able to hit the target. Reliable means that the results of the study can be replicated. If you ran the study under different circumstances and a different background, you would still have similar results. So if something is reliable but not valid, it's hitting the same mark, but you're off the mark. For example, a medicine that's not working, but it's consistently not working, right? Something that's neither reliable nor valid, the results are going to look different every time. But valid and reliable means that it's consistently hitting the target, which means ideally scientific research, insights into science and health are things that should be both valid and reliable to the public. But we know that that's not always the case. It's also important for us to understand the peer review process. Whenever academic, scientific, scholarly work is published, including some of the research that I do, it has to go through a peer review where something is studied, a report or publication draft is developed. It's sent to a journal or publication for review. We have what are called peer reviewers, who are other experts in the field relevant to the topic at hand, who provide feedback to an editor of a journal. Generally speaking, there's what's known as a revise and resubmit, where the feedback and comments are sent back to the scientists to incorporate and change details. Depending upon the acceptance rates, some journals are very restrictive. And eventually, the article will be published if it meets the requirements and rigor that's expected out of the journal. The purpose of peer review is to filter out and ensure that the information and research that's developed is quality. It's been replicated, it's been tested, it's been material that we can feel confident is correct. However, there's also been a shift toward a more expedited process where sometimes a draft or earlier version that is going out to peer review or hasn't been fully reviewed yet is made available to the public to access as kind of an early copy. And sometimes that early copy can be something people are circulating and using media in order to talk about before that study has been fully peer reviewed and fully assessed for its accuracy and validity. So one challenge is, especially in the context of things like COVID, there was a push to get research and information out quickly that hadn't fully been tested, which meant that that information began to be circulated without going through the full peer review process. And that can be a significant problem, right? Misinformation and disinformation can erode the public trust. For example, the Lancet, which is a major journal, had a retraction regarding the role of technology and possible treatment for COVID-19, discussing some of the ways in which the data that was collected was not actually what was needed in order to effectively conduct the study, right? So there are challenges here with how information and research is being utilized and circulated. Not to say that this research is inherently or all bad, just to say that the rigor of going through the research process is something we need to be cognizant of when we're evaluating articles that are discussing health and science-related issues. So there are a variety of different efforts we can think about here in terms of combating misinformation and disinformation. Some websites, including the World Health Organization, have used things like Mythbusters or COVID-19 Portal, right, to provide information and awareness to the public. Oftentimes, there's efforts, for example, celebrities or figures who will engage with the public too. So we can see a variety of efforts, not just with COVID, but also with information that might be misunderstood or possible causes or impacts of a condition that might be misunderstood too. So the authors of this piece have developed a 12-point plan that they use to combat mis and disinformation with regard to COVID, but also more generally. So these 12 different steps, as they're discussed in the article, talk about more exposure and airtime for medical professionals. They talk about using websites that promote, including in search engines, showing up in early results. Verifying the accounts, this has been an area of discussion with Twitter and the blue check mark. Promoting health professionals, again, to make sure that they show up early in search results. monitoring social media to check for mis and disinformation, helping people deal with the stress and mental health related issues, being empathic, right? Grabbing people's attention to address concerns out of care. For example, invoking the language of personal choice to discuss some of the challenges, for example, of a vaccine. Using dialogue to show people's perceptions and how something like a health organization is making decisions. Personal experiences, for example, personal choices that somebody is making about health and why they have developed those positions can be persuasive. Direct health, such as a campaign, which we'll talk more about later in the class, toward a minority population or people disproportionately impacted by an issue. Educational material to address and combat incorrect information, and increased R&D investment can all be ways that there might be steps to combat mis and disinformation. And in this week's activity, I'm asking you to think about some of these methods and assess to what degree you find these to be persuasive strategies. The last reading for this week is the Dobransky and Hargardy piece on inquiring minds to understand why we receive health information online and also to consider the role of differing populations in using this information. So this derives from health lifestyle theory, which is contending that people are making different decisions about their health in the context of the resources, importance, and social factors. One idea that's been brought up is the idea of access to things such as healthy food. You might be familiar with the concept of a food desert, or locations in which access to healthy food is not necessarily readily available. The ability to create and prep healthy food also takes a lot of time and resources. It takes understanding of possible recipes and ways to cook. It takes effort to buy and use the ingredients, and that can be difficult, especially for people who are working very demanding jobs. Something like fast food can be a lot easier, more accessible, and perhaps of better quality overall with the overall comparative resources available. So some issues related to health information online. One of them is that younger, more educated people tend to more actively seek out health information, utilizing technology. Socioeconomic status and age can also be associated with poorer health, including desire or willingness to engage online. And the benefits of online health information, as mentioned, do benefit people with access to devices and the high-speed internet, which with the digital divide is not something that's readily available. So this study goes through a data set that I'll give you the chance to look at a bit more as you're reading through the article. But what is useful to know is the variation with regard to things such as gender, race, ethnicity, and educational background, and those factors being controlled for and understanding people's desire to seek out health information online. And it's also useful to look at where people are seeking out this information. For instance, a lot of people are seeking out information from friends and family, professionals, and a significant amount with regard to the role of media too, including the use of online sources. For example, over 70% saying they used online sources when seeking out treatment for various conditions, and about 2/3 who are seeking out the role of lifestyle and day-to-day decision-making too. So to wrap up the key ideas that we've talked about this week, we've been looking at media and technology, the significant opportunities and challenges that those pose to health and science communication. We've talked about some of the issues related to mis and disinformation that can be a barrier to quality care. And we've also talked about the importance of thinking about audience and context when it comes to engaging in online material. Next week, we will be looking at health and science in public. So best of luck in your work this week and in your Canvas activity and quiz. Have a great rest of your week, and I will talk to you again for a video next week. Have a good one.